Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be reading Kant's Prolegomena, first part of the transcendental problem. How is pure mathematics problem possible? 6. Here is a great and established branch of knowledge, encompassing even now a wonderfully large domain and promising an unlimited extension in the future. Yet it carries with it a thoroughly apodictic certainty, i.e. absolute necessity, which therefore rests upon no empirical grounds. Consequently, it is a pure product of reason and, moreover, a thoroughly synthetical. Here the question arises, how then is it possible for human reason to produce a cognition of this nature entirely a priori? Does not this faculty which produces mathematics, as it neither is nor can be based upon experience, presuppose some ground of cognition a priori, which lies deeply hidden, but which might reveal itself by these effects, if their first beginning were but diligently ferreted out? But we find that all mathematical cognition has this peculiarity. It must first exhibit its concept in a visual form, Anschauung, and indeed a priori therefore in a visual form which is not empirical, but pure. Without this, mathematics cannot take a single step. Hence, its judgments are always visual, intuitive, whereas philosophy must be satisfied with discursive judgments from mere concepts, and though it may illustrate its doctrines through a visual figure, can never derive them from it. The observation on the nature of mathematics gives us a clue to the first and highest condition of its possibility, which is that some non-sensuous visualization called pure intention or reine Anschauung must, from its basis in which all its concepts can be exhibited or constructed in concreto and yet a priori. If we can find out this pure intuition and its possibility, we may thence easily explain how synthetical propositions a priori are possible in pure mathematics, and consequently how this science itself is possible. Empirical intuition, vis-a-vis sense perception, enables us without difficulty to enlarge the concept which we frame of an object of intuition or sense perception by new predicates, which intuition, i.e. sense perception, itself presents synthetically in experience. Pure intuition, vis-a-vis the visualization of forms in our imagination, from which everything sensual, i.e. every thought of material quality, is excluded, does so likewise, only with this difference, that in the latter case, the synthetical judgment is a priori certain and apodictical, in the former only a posteriori empirically certain, because this latter contains only that which occurs in contingent empirical intuition, but the former that which must necessarily be discovered in pure intuition. Here, intuition, being an intuition a priori, is before all experience, before any perception of particular objects, inseparably conjoined with its concept. 8. But with this step, our perplexity seems rather to increase than to lessen. For the question now is, how is it possible to institute or intuit in a visual form anything a priori? An intuition, vis-a-vis a visual sense perception, is such a representation as immediately depends upon the presence of the object. Hence, it seems impossible to intuit from the outset a priori, because intuition would in that event take place without either a former or a present object to refer to, and by consequence could not be an intuition. Concepts indeed are such that we can easily form some of them a priori, vis-a-vis such as contain nothing but the thought of an object in general, and we need not find ourselves in an immediate relation to the object. Take, for instance, the concept of quantity or of cause, etc. But even these require, in order to make them understood, a certain concrete use, that is, an application of some sense experience, Anschauung, by which an object of them is given us. But how can the intuition of an object, of the object, its visualization, precede the object itself? 9. If our intuition, i.e. our sense experience, were perforce of such nature as to represent things as they are in themselves, there would not be any intuition a priori, but intuition would always be empirical. For I can only know what is contained in the object in itself when it is present and given to me. It is indeed even then incomprehensible how the visualization and showing of a present thing should make me know this thing as it is in itself, and its properties cannot migrate into my faculty of representation. But even granting this possibility, a visualizing of the sort would not take place a priori. That is because, before the object were presented to me, for without this latter fact, no reason of a relation between my representation and the object can be imagined, unless it depend upon a direct inspiration. Therefore, in one way only can my intuition anticipate the actuality of the object and be a cognition a priori, vis-a-vis if my intuition contains nothing but the form of sensibility, antedating in my subjectivity all the actual impression through which I am affected by objects. For the object of sense can only be intuited according to this form of sensibility. I can know a priori. Hence it follows that propositions which concern this form of sensuous intuition only are possible and valid for objects of the senses, and as also, conversely, that intuitions which are possible a priori can never concern any other thing than objects of our senses. Accordingly, it is only the form of sensuous intuition by which we can intuit things a priori, but by which we can know objects only as they appear to us, to our senses, not as they are in themselves. And this assumption is absolutely necessary if synthetical propositions a priori be granted to as possible, or if, in case they actually occur, their possibility is to be comprehended and determined beforehand. Now, the intuitions which pure mathematics lays at the foundation of all its cognitions and judgments, which appear at once apodictic and necessary, are space and time. For the mathematics must first have all its concepts in intuition, and pure mathematics in pure intuition, that is, it must construct them. If it proceeded in any other way, it would be impossible to make any headway, for mathematics proceeds not analytically by dissecting of concepts, but synthetically. And if pure intuition be wanting, there is nothing in which the matter of synthetical judgments a priori can be given. Geometry is based upon the pure intuition of space. Arithmetic accomplishes its concept of number by the successive addition of units and time. And pure mechanics especially cannot attain its concepts of motion without employing the representation of time. Both representations, however, are only intuitions. For if we omit from the empirical intuitions of body and their alteration, motion, everything empirical, or belonging to sensation, space and time will still remain, which are therefore pure intuitions that lie a priori at the basis of the empirical. Hence they can never be omitted. But at the same time, by their being pure intuitions a priori, they prove that they are mere forms of our sensibility, which must precede all empirical intuitions, or perception of actual objects, and conformably to which objects can be known a priori, but only as they appear to us. 11. The problem of the present section is therefore solved. Pure mathematics, a synthetical cognition a priori, is only possible by referring to no other objects than those of the senses. At the basis of their empirical intuition lies a pure intuition of space and time, which is a priori. This is possible because the latter intuition is nothing but the mere form of sensibility, which precedes the actual appearance of the objects, in that it, in fact, makes them possible. Yet this faculty of intuiting a priori affects not the matter of the phenomenon, that is, the sense element in it, for this constitutes that which is empirical, but its form vis-a-vis space and time. Should any man venture to doubt that these are determinations adhering not to things in themselves, but to their relation to our sensibility, I should be glad to know how it can be possible to our constitution of things a priori, vis-a-vis before we have any acquaintance with them and before they are presented to us. Such, however, is the case with space and time. But this is quite comprehensible as soon as both count for nothing more than formal conditions of our sensibility, while the objects count merely as phenomena. For then the form of phenomena, i.e. pure intuition, can by all means be represented as proceeding from ourselves, that is, a priori. 12. In order to add something by way of illustration and confirmation, we need only watch the ordinary and necessary procedure of geometers. All proofs of the complete congruence of two given figures, where the one can in every respect be substituted for the other, come ultimately to this, that they may be made to coincide, which is evidently nothing else than a synthetical proposition resting upon immediate intuition, and this intuition must be pure, or given a priori. Otherwise the proposition could not rank as apodictically certain, but would have empirical certainty only. In that case, it would, or it could, only be said that it is always found to be so, and holds good only as so far as our perception reaches. That everywhere space, which in its entirety is itself no longer the boundary of another space, has three dimensions, and that space cannot in any way have more, is based on the proposition that not more than three lines can intersect at right angles in one point. But this proposition cannot by any means be shown from concepts, but rests immediately on intuition, and indeed on pure and a priori intuition, because it is apodictically certain. That we can require a line to be drawn to infinity in identifium, or that a series of changes, for example, space traversed by motion, shall be infinitely continued, presupposes a representation of space and time which can only attach to intuition, namely, so far as it in itself is bound by nothing, for from concepts it could never be inferred. Consequently, the basis of mathematics actually are pure intuitions, which make its synthetical and apodictical valid propositions possible. Hence, our transcendental deduction of the notions of space and time explains, at the same time, the possibility of pure mathematics. Here we go. Consequently, the basis of mathematics actually are pure intuitions, which make its synthetic and apodictically valid propositions possible. Hence, our transcendental deduction of the notions of space and time explains, at the same time, the possibility of pure mathematics. Without some such deduction, its truth may be granted, but its existence could by no means be understood, and we must assume that everything which can be given to our senses, to the external senses, in space to the internal one in time, is intuited by us as it appears to us, not as it is in itself. 13. Those who cannot yet rid themselves of the notion that space and time are actual qualities inhering in things in themselves may exercise their acumen in the following paradox. When they have in vain attempted its solution, and are free from prejudices, at least for a few moments, they will suspect that the degradation of space and of time to mere forms of our sensuous intuition may perhaps be well founded. If two things are quite equal in all respects, as much as they can be ascertained by all means possible, quantitatively and qualitatively, it must follow that one can in all cases and under all circumstances replace the other, and this substitution would not occasion the least perceptible difference. This, in fact, is true of plane figures in geometry, but some spherical figures exhibit notwithstanding a complete internal agreement, such a constraint in their external relation, that the one figure cannot possibly be put in the place of the other. For instance, two spherical triangles on opposite hemispheres, which have an arc of the equator as their common base, may be quite equal, both as regards sides and angles, so that nothing is to be found in either. If it be described for itself alone and completed, that would not equally be applicable to both, and yet the one cannot be put in the place of the other. being situated upon the opposite hemisphere. Here, then, is an internal difference between the two triangles, which difference our understanding cannot describe as internal, and which only manifests itself by external relations in space. But I shall adduce examples from common life that are more obvious still. What can be more similar in every respect and in every part more like to my hand and to my ear than their images in a mirror? And yet I cannot put such a hand as is seen in the glass on the place of its archetype. For if this is a right hand, that in the glass is a left one, and in the image of reflection of the right ear is a left one, which never can serve as a substitute for the other, there are in this case no internal differences which our understanding could determine by thinking alone. Yet the differences are internal as the sense teach, for, notwithstanding their complete equality and similarity, the left hand cannot be enclosed in the same bounds as the right one. They are not congruent. The glove of the one hand cannot be used for the other. What is the solution? These objects are not representations of things as they are in themselves, and as the pure understanding would cognize them, but sensuous intuition, that is, appearances, the possibility of which rests upon the relation of certain things unknown in themselves to something else vis-a-vis to our sensibility. Space is the form of the external intuition of this sensibility, and the internal determination of every space is only possible by the determination of its external relation to the whole space, of which it is a part. In other words, by its relation to the external sense. That is to say, the part is only possible through the whole, which is never the case with things in themselves, as objects of the mere understanding, but with appearances only. Hence the difference between similar and equal things which are not yet congruent. For instance, two symmetrical helices cannot be made intelligible by any concept, but only by the relation to the right and the left hands, which immediately refers to intuition. Remark 1. Pure mathematics, and especially pure geometry, can only have objective reality on condition that they refer to objects of sense. But in regard to the latter, the principle holds good, that our sense representation is not a representation of things in themselves, but of the way in which they appear to us. Hence it follows that the propositions of geometry are not the results of mere creation of our poetic imagination, and that therefore they cannot be referred with assurance to actual objects, but rather that they are necessarily valid of space, and consequently of all that may be found in space, because space is nothing else than the form of all external appearances, and it is this form alone which objects of sense can be given. Sensibility, the form of which is the basis of geometry, is that upon which the possibility of external appearance depends. Therefore, these appearances can never contain anything but what geometry prescribes to them. It would be quite otherwise if the senses were so constituted as to represent objects as they are in themselves, for then it would not by any means follow from the conception of space, which with all its properties serves to the geometer as an a priori foundation, together with what is thence inferred, must be so in nature. The space of the geometer would be considered a mere fiction, and it would not be credited with objective validity, because we cannot see how things must of necessity agree with an image of them, which we must spontaneously and previous to our acquaintance with them. But if this image, rather this formal intuition, is the essential property of our sensibility, by means of which alone objects are given to us, and if this sensibility represents not things in themselves but their appearances, we shall easily comprehend, and at the same time indisputably move, that all external objects of our world of sense must necessarily coincide in the most rigorous way with the propositions of geometry, because sensibility by means of its form of external intuition vis-a-vis by space, the same with which the geometer is occupied, makes those objects at all possible as mere appearances. It will always remain a remarkable phenomenon in the history of philosophy that there was a time when even mathematicians, who at the same time were philosophers, began to doubt not of the accuracy of their geometrical propositions so far as they concern space, but of their objective validity and the applicability of these concepts itself, and of all of its corollaries to nature. They showed much concern whether a line in nature might not consist of physical points, and consequently that true space in the object might consist of simple discrete parts, while the space which the geometer has in his mind cannot be such. They did not recognize that this mental space renders possible the physical space, i.e., the extension of matter. That this pure space is not at all a quality of things in themselves, but a form of our sensuous faculty of relation, of representation, and that all objects in space are mere appearances, i.e., not things in themselves, but representations of our sensuous intuition. But such is the case, for the space of the geometer is exactly the form of sensuous intuition, which we find a priori in us, and contain the ground of the possibility of all external appearances, according to their form. And the latter must necessarily and most rigidly agree with the propositions of the geometer, which he draws not from any fictitious concept, but from the subjective basis of all external phenomena, which is sensibility itself. In this and no other way can geometry be made secure as to the undoubted objective reality of its propositions against all the intrigues of a shallow metaphysics which is surprised at them, the geometrical propositions, because it has not traced them to the source of their concept. Remark 2. Whatever is given as an object must be given us in intuition. Whatever is given us as object must be given us in intuition. All our intuition, however, takes place by means of the senses only. The understanding intuits nothing, but only reflects. And as we have just shown, that the senses never and in no manner enable us to know things in themselves, but only their appearances, which are mere representations of the sensibility, we conclude that all bodies, together with the space in which they are, must be considered nothing but mere representations in us, and exist nowhere but in our thoughts. You will say, is not this manifest idealism? Idealism consists in the assertion that there are nothing but thinking beings. All other things which we think are perceived in intuition, being nothing but representation in the thinking beings to which no object external to them corresponds, in fact. Whereas I say that things as objects of our sense exist outside us are given, but we know nothing of what they may be in themselves. Knowing only their appearances, i.e., the representations which they cause in us by affecting our senses, consequently, I grant by all means that there are bodies without us, that is, things which, though quite unknown to us what they are in themselves, we yet know by the representations which their influence on our sensibility procures us, and which we call bodies, a term signifying merely the appearance of the thing which is unknown to us, but not therefore less actual. Can this be termed idealism? It is the very contrary. Long before Locke's time, but assuredly since him, it has been generally assumed and granted without detriment to the actual existence of external things that many of their predicates may be said to belong not to the things in themselves, but to their appearances, and to have no proper existence outside our representation. Heat, colour, and taste, for instance, are of this kind. Now, if I go farther and for weighty reasons rank as mere appearance the remaining qualities of body also, which are called primary, such as extension, place, and in general space, with all that which belongs to it, impenetrability or materiality space, no one in the least can adduce the reason of its being inadmissible, as little as the man who admits colour not to the properties of the object in itself, but only as modifications of the sense of sight, should on that account be called an idealist. So little can my system be named idealistic, merely because I find that more, nay, all the properties which constitute the intuition of body belong merely to its appearance. The existence of the thing that appears is thereby not destroyed as a genuine idealism, but it is only shown that we cannot possibly know it by the senses as it is in itself. I should be glad to know that my assertions must be in order to avoid all idealism. Undoubtedly, I should say that the representation of space is not only perfectly comfortable to the relation which our sensibility has to objects, that I have said, but that it is quite similar to the object, an assertion in which I can find as little meaning as if I said that the sensation of red has a similarity to the property of vermilion, which in me excites the sensation. So we're on remark 3 now, and I think remark 3 is so remark 3 is the last one. Hence, we may at once dismiss an easy foreseen but futile object, quote, that by admitting the ideality of space and of time, the whole sensible world would be turned into a mere sham, end quote. At first, all philosophical insight into the nature of sensuous cognition was spoiled by making the sensibility merely a confused mode of representation, according to which we still know things as they are, but without being able to reduce everything in this, a representation to a clear consciousness, whereas proof is offered by us that sensibility consists, not in this logical distinction of clearness and obscurity, but in the genetical one of the origin of cognition itself. For sensuous perception represents things not at all as they are, but only the mode in which they affect our senses, and consequently, by sensuous perception, appearance only, and not things themselves, are given to the understanding for reflection. After this necessary corrective, an objection rises from an unpardonable and almost intentional misconception, as if my doctrine turned all the things of the world of sense into a mere illusion. When an appearance is given to us, we are still quite free as to how we should judge the matter. The appearance depends upon the senses, but the judgment upon the understanding, and the only question is whether in the determination of the object there is truth or not. But the difference between truth and dreaming is not ascertained by the nature of the representations which are referred to objects, for they are the same in both cases, but by their connection according to those rules, which determine the coherence of the representations in the concept of an object, and by ascertaining whether they can subsist together in experience or not. And it is not the fault of the appearance if our cognition makes illusion for truth, i.e., if the intuition by which an object is given us is considered a concept of the thing or of its existence also, which the understanding can only think. The senses represent to us the paths of the planets as now progressive, now retrogressive, and herein is neither falsehood nor truth, because as long as we hold this path to be nothing but appearance, we do not judge of the objective nature of their motion, but as a false judgment may easily arise when the understanding is not on its guard against the subjective mode of representation being considered objective. We say they appear to move backward. It is not the senses, however, which must be charged with the illusion, but the understanding, whose province alone it is to give an objective judgment on appearances. Thus, even if we did not at all reflect on the origin of our representations, whenever we connect our intuitions of these, whatever they may contain, in space and in time, according to the rules of the coherence of all cognition and experience, illusion or truth will arise according as we are negligent, or careful. It is merely a question of the use of sensuous representations in the understanding and not of their origin. In the same way, if I consider all the representations of the senses, together with their form, space, and time, to be nothing but appearances, and space and time to be a mere form of the sensibility, which is not to be met with the objects of out of it, And if I make use of these representations in reference to possible experience only, there is nothing in my regarding them as appearances that can lead astray or cause illusion. For all that they can correctly cohere according to the rules of truth and experience, thus all the propositions of geometry hold good of space as well as of all the objects of the senses, consequently of all possible experience, whether I consider space as a mere form of the sensibility or as something cleaving to the things themselves. In the former case, however, I comprehend how I can know a priori these propositions concerning all the objects of external intuition. Otherwise, everything else as regards all possible experience remains just as if I had not departed from the vulgar view. But if I venture to go beyond all possible experience with my notions of space and time, which I cannot refrain from doing, if I proclaim them qualities inherent in them, set in things in themselves, for what should prevent me from letting them letting them hold good of the same thing, even though my senses might be different and unsuited to them? Then a grave error may arise due to illusion, for thus I would proclaim to be universally valid what is merely subjective condition of the intuition of things, and sure only for all objects of sense. For all possible experience, I would refer this condition to things in themselves, and do not limit it to the condition of experience. Okay, 2 more pages. My doctrine of the ideality of space and of time, therefore, far from reducing the whole sensible world to mere illusion, is the only means of securing the application of one of the most important conditions, that which mathematics propounds a priori, to actual objects, and of preserving its being regarded as mere illusion. For without this observation, it would be quite impossible to make out whether the intuition of space and time, which we borrow from no experience, and which yet lie in our representation a priori, are not mere phantasms of our brain, to which objects do not correspond, or at least do not adequately, and consequently whether we have been able to show its unquestionable validity with regard to all the objects of the sensible world, just because they are mere appearances. Secondly, though these my principles make appearances of the representations of the senses, they are so far from turning the truth of experience into mere illusion, that they are rather the only means of preventing the transcendental illusion by which metaphysics has hitherto been deceived, leading to the childish endeavor of catching at bubbles, because appearances, which are mere representations, were taken for things in themselves. Here originated the remarkable event of the antinomy of reason, which I shall mention by and by, and which is destroyed by the single observation that appearance, as long as it is employed in experience, produces truth. But the moment it transgresses the boundaries of experience, and consequently becomes transcendent, produces nothing but illusion. Inasmuch, therefore, as I leave to things, as we obtain them, by the senses their actuality, and only limit our sensuous intuition of these things to this, that they represent in no respect, not even in the pure intuition of space and time, anything more than mere appearance of those things, but never their constitution in themselves. But this is not a sweeping illusion invented for nature by me. My protestation, too, against all charges of idealism is so valid and clear as even to seem superfluous, whether were they not incompetent judges, who, while they would have an old name for every deviation from their perverse thought common opinion, and never judge of the spirit of philosophical nomenclature, but cling to the latter only, are ready to put their own conceits in the place of well-defined notions, and thereby deform and distort them. I have myself given this my theory the name of transcendental idealism, but that cannot authorize anyone to confound it either with the empirical idealism of Descartes. Indeed, his was only an insoluble problem, owing to which he thought everyone at liberty to deny the existence of the corporeal world because it could never be proved satisfactorily, or with the mystical and visionary idealism of Berkeley, against which and other similar phantasms of critique contains the proper antidote. My idealism concerns not the existence of things, the doubt of which, however, constitutes idealism in the ordinary sense, since it never came into my head to doubt it, but it concerns the sensuous representations of things, to which space and time especially belong. Of these, vis-a-vis space and time, consequently, of all appearances in general, I have only shown that they are neither things but mere modes of representation, nor determinations belong to things in themselves. But the word transcendental, which with me means a reference of our cognition, i.e., not to things, but only to the cognitive faculties, was meant to obviate this misconception. Yet rather than give further occasion to it by this word, I now retract it and desire this idealism of mine to be called critical. But if it be really an objectionable idealism, to convert actual things, not appearances, into mere representations, but what name shall we call him who conversely changes mere representations into things? I may, I think, be called dreaming idealist, in contradistinction to the former, which may be called visionary, both of which are to be refuted by my transcendental, or better, critical idealism. Okay, so that was the how is mathematics possible. Next time we're going to read the second part of the transcendental problem, how is science of nature possible. Till next time, take care.